Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to ask for your opinion. You know, the Garden of Eden was the first, quote unquote, promised land, and a land that God personally cared for, and so on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The introduction to the Torah, Genesis 1 through 3, is very much not just an introduction to the Torah. It's really an introduction to the entire Bible. And if you look at the role of the Garden of Eden, can only be understood when you look at it in the light of the larger story. And so it's remarkable. In Genesis 1, God creates the world, and scholars tell us, and it's clearly there, that creation is like the preparation of a temple. Okay, it's the preparation of a temple. Okay, but for every temple, the function of the temple is you need a holy of holies. God needs a place to dwell, right? And so Genesis 1 is the building, as it were. But then you have Genesis chapter 2, and Genesis chapter 2 and 3 is the Holy of Holies. The Garden of Eden is this very unique place within the temple of creation where God, it says in chapter 3, he's walking in the garden. The phrase there for walking is what he does in the temple with his people. But what's also really remarkable is that you look at the ways in which, for instance, God creates this special land or this special place, Eden, the way that it's bounded by rivers. What's remarkable about these rivers is that these rivers are repeated in Genesis chapter 18 when God defines the promised land for Abraham. This is the land I'm going to give you, okay? It says that God brings Adam in and rests him in the garden. The same language used in Deuteronomy for God bringing and resting his people in the land. Adam's staying in the garden is conditioned over keeping a commandment, Israel. I mean, this is all Israel. Israel's brought into the land, this special land where God dwells with his people, right? Israel's staying in the land was conditioned upon them keeping the commandments. Adam meets this original inhabitant of the garden, right? The serpent who starts to tempt him or tempt Eve, right? The same thing with the Canaanites. Yes. And so what you really see is the introduction is really a preparation for the story of Israel. But what that then means then, the Garden of Eden is directly associated with the promised land. And this land then becomes absolutely critical to everything else that God does. This land, not just the world, the land itself has to be under the maintenance of Adam and Adam's descendants, okay? And so I would argue that till this very day, that has never changed, right? Why does the Messiah need to come back to Israel? I mean, it talks about, I've heard people say Israel is no longer important, the land of Israel is no longer important, which is kind of absurd because if you think about it, it's kind of absurd because if you look at the former prophets, it's really interesting that you have two specific places marked out as key for the Messiah. Bethlehem, right? And obviously that was a literal Bethlehem in his birth. And then you have what? And that's in Micah chapter 5. And then you have the Mount of Olives, right? At his return. And so why does the Messiah need to come back here? Because this is the Garden of Eden. This is the original promised land. It's from this land that God has to reign over the entire world. When Eden is under his control, the entire world will be under his control.
So there's much to say about this that I want to ask, but you actually wrote the book on this called Adam as Israel. So the Garden of Eden that represents the land of Israel is the temple, God's Holy of Holies. So what is the role of Adam and Eve?
Yeah. Again, great question. And they actually have two roles, which is really brilliant. In chapter 1, they're described as king and queen. They're called to rule, right? In chapter 2, if you look at the way that he's called to protect and guard the garden, if you look at the ways in which he's functioning within the garden, he's a priest, right? And so Adam is both king and priest. Israel is called to be a kingdom of priests. And so the Adam's role in the garden foreshadows Israel's role as a people to be a kingdom of priests. And then we bring that to the Messiah, Yeshua, who is in himself both king and priest. And so, again, because he is king and priest, it means that he will rule. He will rule from the land of Israel. He will rule over the world from the land of Israel. And he will also provide the access we need to the presence of God.
Now, we mentioned that the garden, and in parallel Israel, the land of Israel, is supposed to be a place of rest where God rules and so on. And yet, you know, in the last couple of years, but it's true for at least for the last 7 years, and probably more, but the last couple of years have been probably the hardest for our people, at least since the Holocaust, but probably even more than that. And you know, there always seems to be struggle, even though that's God's place. There always seems to be struggle. And going back to the garden, you know, the serpent was allowed. So how does that play out?
Yeah. A friend of mine used to say, and I agree with him, whatever God especially loves, Satan especially hates. And again, this is the epicenter of God's, this is where God is going to bless the entire world. It's from this land that God's going to ultimately defeat the serpent. And so there's a real battle. It's like, you know, when you think about military strategy, and there are certain key places that involve, you know, the epicenter, the key places of strategic places, there's typically very heightened battle, right? And this is like, in terms of, you know, Satan hates all of humanity, but it seems to me that he especially hates this land and this people, again, because of God's plan of blessing, God's plan of redemption. And so, you know, we've seen this all throughout history, that, you know, Satan continues to try to destroy, to discourage, but God is faithful. God is faithful. And again, we talked about this in the previous episode, the fact that Yeshua is going to come and he's going to stand on the Mount of Olives, right? There's a reason for that, right? That's, in a sense, he's going to renew Eden. In Isaiah chapter 11, it talks of, you know, a very famous messianic prophecy. And what goes on there, it's really beautiful, is that, you know, you've got these animals at peace. Once again, you've got a child putting his hand over a viper's hole. That's a reversal of the curse, and it's a renewal of Eden. And so again, we see that there's a terrible battle for this land, but God is going to ultimately defeat evil, and in this land there will be rest.
And you know, it's very we're well familiar with the phenomenon that, you know, a lot of Israelis really feel the need, and I specifically call it the need, to get out of Israel for a vacation, because it's so intense. And I think many times it's easy to miss that the intensity is not just, you know, with the actual things that are happening, but it's actually spiritual intensity in a lot of ways. And it you know, we ourselves feel that many, many times. Now, what is happening then outside the garden? Okay, why did God tell Adam to subdue the earth?
Yeah. So again, I guess the way I see the subdue there is I would relate it directly to chapter 3 of Genesis. So, you know, I see that as directly, he was intended to subdue the serpent, right? That was, you know, and he didn't. He abdicated the ground, and he was kicked out, and he was exiled. And crazy enough, or as providence would have it, that exile ended up with his descendants in Babylon in Genesis chapter 11, which is, again, Israel's story. And so, you know, when it describes the Garden of Eden, it says that the river comes out, you know, from Eden to water the rest of the world. And I see that as just a picture of God's intent.
In Zechariah 14?
Yeah, but also, yeah, exactly. Also in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, but I think the language is clear, and that is that it's from this land that the waters of blessing go to the rest of the world. And I think that that's the point, is that, you know, it's not that God God only wants to bless Eden. It's not that God only wants to bless Israel or God only wants to bless the Jewish people. God wants a center from where he's going to bless all nations. And so whenever, and we see this as a principle, whatever God does for his people, it's always for the benefit of the nations. The nations always benefit. That's why God chose Abraham. In you, all the families of the planet, of the earth, will be blessed. And so Eden is kind of the strategic, the beachhead, right? From Eden, God blesses the entire world. And so that's why I would see that, that's where the battle is. And the fact of the matter is because Adam abdicated his role to subdue, to conquer the serpent, we're paying for it.
Thank you so much, Seth. This has been very fascinating, and I look forward to chatting again. Thank you.
Thank you.